but I'll start. Let me share my screen. Put a one in the chat, or Savannah, you just tell me if you see the screen. I think I see it.
Yep, we're good.
Yeah, cool. So this is what we'll cover today. The previous slide I'll talk about in a minute, but there's going to be 4 things we're going to talk about. It's on the demo, but last time I was on Sales Hacker, we talked about with Aaron. We talked about like the actual demo itself, but most demos actually don't close on that first call. They close on maybe a secondary demo, a third demo, fourth demo, whatever it is, especially if you're doing enterprise. And so we're going to talk about like, one, what do you do at the end of the demo? So first thing we're going to learn is how do you set up next steps after the demo that prospects actually want to show up to? The second thing we're going to talk about is how to prevent objections from happening when you're not in the room. So how do you sniff them out early? The third thing we're going to talk about is a very powerful post-demo email that I send out. It's essentially like a recap email, and you could even send it out after like a discovery call. It works the same way. It's dangerously simple of an email, basic structure, but it's very powerful. And the last thing we'll talk about is how do you prevent, or how do you have prospects thinking about you all the time? So how do you make sure that you're top of mind? And then there's a little bonus at the end that I'll cover. But before I go into today's content, I'll do a little quick recap from last time, which was how do you build trust quickly? And I think it's really important for anyone that wasn't on our last workshop. But a couple of things here that may come off very basic, and some of the things that are like, oh, maybe I should be doing this more. But it's important that you build trust quickly on the demo, because if you don't, then setting up the next steps with the prospect, staying top of mind, all those things will become very difficult to do and practically impossible, virtually impossible. So the first thing, as far as the checklist, is you want to keep your webcam on the entire time, and you want to be the first one to have your webcam on. And I know it's a shocker because a lot of people don't turn on their webcams. They sort of wait for their prospect to make the first move. And I'm going to go through this quickly because it was information that we covered in the previous workshop. Before every discovery or demo that you're doing, you always want to be mindful of the prospect's time. And so you want to say something like, hey, Savannah, I just want to be mindful of your time. I see we have this blocked out until 3 p.m. Eastern. Do you have a hard stop? So you want to be mindful of the prospect's time. The third thing that you want to do on every single discovery and or demo is you want to set the objective and share the agenda of what the call is going to be about. That's how you're setting the expectation. So it would sound something like, hey, the goal of today's call would be X, Y, Z, whatever that is. Fourth, you want to share with the prospect what you already know, especially if you're doing, like I just literally, as of today, I just closed a client. It's a software company. They have about 7 salespeople. We had 3 or 4 calls. 3 of them were discoveries. One of them was like a deck going through my thing. So that's like a demo. But what I made sure to do on every one of those calls was I shared with them what I already knew from our previous calls. I based on my research, based on our calls. Find personal commonalities to build rapport. And that means when the webcam is on, if you're noticing anything in the background, maybe a plant, maybe a dog, maybe a photo, whatever it is, call that out. That's very important to pick up on that. Show similar client case studies. So when you tell a prospect, hey, our product can do X, Y, Z for you, generate more revenue, generate more pipeline, that's very biased, but it's not as biased if you have someone else doing the talking for you, and that's a client or a customer. And I talked about recap discovery, and then pre-demo nurture. That's something that's really important whenever you're scheduling a follow-up with a prospect. So let's say you have a next steps on the calendar for next week. From now until then, which I'll talk about a little later, but you want to nurture them a little bit more. So maybe send them a case study of a customer that has a really similar use case to them, and that just reinforces your product. So those are the quick checklist. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I just want to do a recap. And I want to make a little note. I told Savannah this earlier. Feel free to interrupt me. I will stop and answer questions throughout. I don't like saving questions for last because I don't want you to sit through a long presentation or a workshop. So interrupt me. Feel free to go off and chat, and I'll stop, and hopefully Savannah will catch you too. All right, so let's jump in. So let's talk about setting next steps. But before I tell you how to set up before I tell you how to set up the right next steps, Let me tell you how to not set up, how to do it, what's happening the wrong way, how a lot of salespeople are doing it the wrong way. So most next steps that I hear on calls, recorded calls, and I speak to sales reps that are not done properly have these three things in common. They're forced, they're ambiguous, and they're selfish. So the force means you're literally telling the prospect to set up something on the calendar because you just need to have something on the calendar. A lot of times we do this because our sales leaders have told us to do this, or we were taught to do this. I was taught to do this. I remember when I first started sales, it was like, always make sure you have something on the calendar. Always, always, no matter what. So whenever I ended the call and it really, there wasn't a reason for setting up next steps, I would say, let's get something on the books. Let's get something on the calendar. Prospect says, I don't know what my calendar is going to look like next week. I'm going on vacation. All right, well, let's just get something when you get back. So we're constantly forcing the next steps. It's a common one that I'm seeing. Ambiguous is most of the time that I'm hearing salespeople set up next steps. There is no real agenda for the next steps. A lot of it is like, let's get something on the books. Let's see where you're at. Let's chat next week to see, what you thought about the competitors. Let's see what you've. Let's chat next week so you can see what your team said internally. Truth is, if I'm a prospect and you're pitching me and I'm evaluating your software and you tell me, hey, Mor, let's get something on the book so we can see where you're at next week. I don't want to block out 15 minutes of my time. I don't want to block out 30 minutes of my time to just give you an update. I'll send you an email. So you have to keep that in mind when you're trying to set up next steps with prospects. And the third one, it's selfish. Most of the time, if you hear like what a bad next step sounds like, it's like I said, let's get something on the books. I want to know where you're at next week. So it's always about what you're getting out of the deal or what you're getting out of the next steps versus the prospect. Put a 1 in the chat if you've caught yourself doing any of these things. Either you're forcing them, they're ambiguous, or they're selfish. Love the honesty, by the way. I love the honesty. So I'm going to teach you how to. Someone put a 0. So I'm going to teach you how to change this up. Comes down to two things. There's an acronym a framework and an acronym that I have called WIFT. What's in it for them? And then the second thing is specific. So I'm going to break down for each of these. So what's in it for them? When you're setting up the prospect, why should the prospect show up? Why should they care to show up to the next step? And you have to really think about this. And you can't. The tricky thing is you can't come up with this last minute. Meaning, let's just say you have a discovery call, because we're talking about demos, but a lot of you are doing discoveries and then scheduling a secondary demo. I'm actually curious. Put a 1 if you're doing demos and discovery in one call, and put a 2 if you're separating them. Cool. I don't know what a 3 would be, but so we have a mixed batch. Okay. So the way to do this, the way to think about like what's in it for them in advance, you're not like stuck at, oh crap, what do I tell them now that makes it beneficial for them, is to prep for it in advance, which I'll cover on the next slide. Like, what are some things that you can pay attention to throughout the demo or throughout the discovery call that you're like, that's a really good reason for the prospect to show up to. But just know that in order for your next steps to be effective, where the prospect says yes to it and they show up to it and maybe they loop in other folks, there has to be a good enough reason for the prospect. What's in it for them? Because the prospect is thinking, what's in it for me? Like I said, a lot of times when you schedule a follow-up and you say, let's get something on the books or let's get something on the calendar for an update to see where you're at, see what your team said, the prospect will think to themselves, yeah, sure, whatever. They confirm it, you put it on the calendar, they may not show up, they may cancel last minute, they may not tell you. In their head, they're like, I don't want to block out 1 hour of my time or 30 minutes of my time to do this. So that's the thing. The second thing you want to make sure that your next steps have is specificity. I mentioned in the previous slide that a lot of next steps are ambiguous. There's no real reason. So what is the actual reason that you're setting up the next steps for? Essentially, what's the agenda for the next step? So I'm giving you a 30,000 foot view of what to do. Now I'm going to tell you how to do it. So I found there are a couple of things that I noticed. One, I pay attention to not only sales calls that I'm having with prospects, but I pay a lot of attention to how I am as a buyer or as a prospect to salespeople. So I'll evaluate software myself. I'll evaluate services, marketing services, etc. And I pay attention to what makes me like annoyed, what makes me lean in more, what makes me more open to giving answers. I actually read my spam folder, for example, once a week on purpose. I I listen to cold calls. When I get a cold call, I answer. If I know it's a cold call, I'll answer on purpose. I want to see what's happening in the industry and what causes me to have a certain reaction. So between that and what I've tested out with thousands of AEs when I was a VP of sales and hundreds of AEs now in my coaching program, these are things that I noticed that do really well that answers those two things. One, what's in it for them that causes the prospect to say, yeah, I'll show up. And two, creates specificity. Unanswered questions is the first thing. So when you're on a call, on a discovery call or a demo or both, I want you to pay attention to things that your prospect asks you that you don't have the answers to, that you usually say something like, great question, let me get back to you on that. Because the let me get back to you on that is something that the prospect wants. It's very specific, and that you can actually set up a follow-up call for that. So an example of that would be, say the prospect asks you, let's say you have they're really meticulous about the reporting and analytics of your software. So one of the things that you can do is, and you tell them, hey, I'll get back to you on that. And then at the end of the call, you know that you have something to get back to them on that. You can say something like, hey, Savannah, earlier on the call, you had asked me about the analytics and if it's capable of doing X, Y, Z. And I said, I'll get back to you on that. So why don't we do this? Let me speak to my team and let's schedule a 15 minutes for next week or in 2 days so I can actually go over exactly how we do that. Would Tuesday at 5 p.m. work for you or Wednesday at 4 p.m.? So most likely they're probably going to say yes because one, the reason is not free. It's not a selfish reason. It's for them. They asked for you to get them the answer. You're going to get back to them on that. And that's a really good reason for them to show up. The second thing is running out of time on the call. And so if you notice that you're doing a call, and usually this happens if there's multiple stakeholders on the call. If there are multiple stakeholders on the call and you're seeing that the demo is sort of being derailed because they're asking a lot of questions, what you can do is you can sort of interrupt the demo and say something like, and I'll use Frederick because I just saw his name here on the right-hand side. You can say, hey, Frederick, I love these questions. I'm afraid that we may not have time to cover everything. Would it be okay if we did a part 2 of this, going through mostly Q&A and diving deep into some of your questions? Because I know we won't have enough time to cover it. One, it's selfless, right? What's in it for them? Well, we don't have enough time to cover everything that you want to see. So that's the reason. And it's specific. The next step, the follow-up that we're going to set up for is very specific. It's to go over part 2 of the demo or part 2 of the discovery. The third one that I noticed that prospects really care about, and it happens a lot when you're dealing with C-level executives, you're dealing with, you're maybe selling cybersecurity, you're maybe selling IT, something a little bit more complex, is a technical call required. So when you're on a demo and you notice, again, going back to prospects are asking or talking about very specific technical functionalities of your software and capabilities, your initial demo it shouldn't be technical. Your initial demo should really be, let's do this. On the chat, anybody could type in, what was the last movie you watched in theaters? Type it in the chat. Doesn't matter which movie. Maverick. That was a long time ago, I think. No? Maverick. Okay. Top Gun Maverick. All right. Put a 1 in the chat if you watched the trailer, and put a 2 if you didn't watch the trailer for Maverick before watching the movie. Yeah. So most of the time that people go to movies, they go to the movie because they watched the trailer. The trailer was so good that it captivated them to say, you know what, it's worth me spending more time in watching the movie. That is what a demo is, an initial demo. It's a trailer. It teases up what's to be expected. It's good enough for you to know exactly what you're getting out of it, how it's going to solve your problem, but not deep enough where you can to make a decision right there on the spot. that's where the follow-up comes in. So that's why I say that the initial demo shouldn't be technical. That's like watching the movie. And demos should also not be, it shouldn't be a training. You shouldn't be showing everything. That's what a training is for, an onboarding call. So when you notice that your initial demo is getting technical, where it's the movie, that is a reason for you to say, you know what? It seems like you have a lot of, it seems that we covered some stuff on the demo that requires a little bit more technical functionality, technical conversation. So would it be a bad idea if we schedule a follow-up call where we talked about the technical aspect of XYZ feature that you had interest in? Most likely the prospect will say yes. Why? For the same reason as before. What's in it for them? They want to know the technical aspects of it, especially if you're dealing with C-level executives. Two, it's very specific, and it's not selfless, or it's not selfish. All right. The fourth one is more stakeholders need to be involved. This happens a lot on initial demos. Usually, I mean, if you're lucky, you get all the stakeholders on the initial demo, but most of the time there are other people that need to be looped in, and you're talking to the champion and they say something like, well, we'll eventually have to loop in so-and-so, assuming this is a fit. So what I'd recommend, this is something that I literally just taught somebody how to do, is when you're on a call with a prospect and you know that there's going to be other stakeholders, then that's a reason for you to set up next steps. An example of this would be that something that recently happened was, hey, prospect, typically when I speak to so-and-so titles, whatever, VPs of sales at, advertising agencies or whatever it is, many times there's other people within the company that they'd like to loop in, like their director of sales and their manager of sales, but they only like to loop them in, assuming that the product is a fit based on just the initial demo. Would that be the same case for you? They would say, let's just say yes, or they would say, no, we'd actually only loop in our marketing manager. And then you would say something like, okay, well, assuming this demo, at the end of the demo, you see that it does what you want it to do in terms of solving XYZ problem. Would it be okay if we scheduled a follow-up call with your marketing manager or marketing director as a part two? So what you're doing is you're setting up the next steps for looping in more stakeholders, because that's what typically happens. Again, it's not selfish, it's selfless, it's very specific, and it's what's in it for them, because typically this is how other marketers or other VPs do it. Interested but not yet ready. That's the common one. Put a one in the chat if you offer a POC or free trial for your software, and put a 2 if you don't. Curious. Okay. So for the ones that put 1, this is where you can leverage your free trial a little bit. And maybe you're doing this already, maybe you're not. But on the demo, again, most demos aren't one call closes, and many times you're not dealing with I love this, let's sign up tomorrow or in 2 days. Most of the time, there is some level of due diligence that they need to do. They're on the fence about it. In that case, that's a really good reason to pull the lever of setting up a free trial versus, let's just say you're up on a free trial. So if you're noticing there's a little hesitancy on the demo, then what you can say to the prospect is, hey, Harish, I see a Harish in the name here. Hey, Harish, I noticed that you had some hesitancy on or 3 things that we talked about on the call, A, B, C. And you know what? If you told me right now that you're ready to sign up, honestly, I wouldn't agree to it, because I feel like you're on the fence about it, and I want to make sure that you've made a very confident decision. So why don't we do this? Why don't we set you up for a free trial, whatever your free trial is, 7 days, 14 days, whatever it is. Why don't we set you up for a 7-day free trial, or a 14-day free trial, or 30-day trial, or 90-day POC, where not only are you testing this out, but the other people that you mentioned earlier on the call are also going through this. And what I'd recommend is we set up maybe 2 additional training calls on that POC. Would that be a good next step, Harish? And so again, it works because the prospect is not fully on board. They're interested, but they're hesitant. They're on the fence. So they need more validation. They need to feel more confident in their decision. Well, a follow-up email that says, hey, you're ready to sign up, or a follow-up call on the calendar just to see where they're at, is not going to make them more confident. What is going to make someone more confident is for them to be able to test drive your product without paying for it. So if you offer a free trial, that would be the way to do it. If you don't offer a free trial for the 2s, like I have a client right now. They have 15 sales reps. They don't offer free trials. They have a money back guarantee, but they don't advertise it. But internally, their VP of sales says, if you have someone that wants a free trial and they're pushing for it, you can give one. And you have the ability to give, up to a 30-day free trial. But they don't advertise it. So if the ones that put it 2, I would speak to your sales leader and I would ask, hey, if we have someone on the fence, we did a demo, they're on the fence, not yet sold, would we be open to offering them a free trial of some sorts, 14 days, 7 day, whatever it is, even a 48-hour free trial? If the answer is yes, that is your lever that you can then pull when someone is on the fence on the call. Hey, Bodo, I see we have a Bodo in here. Typically I see that you're a little bit on the fence here, and there's some pending things that you need to find out before making a confident decision of, is this a fit for you guys? So we don't offer a free trial, but I think if you're open to it, we can do like a 48-hour free trial with you only. And we would, on that 48-hour free trial, we'd schedule a secondary call where we'd go into the software together and we'd run a use case within the software together so you can see how it would work. Otherwise, a demo alone may not be enough for you to say, yes, this is for us. So that type of script, what it does is it meets the prospect where they are, because they're not ready to make a commitment. So I found that these four items work really, really well for the prospect to say, yes, this I'm willing to get on the call. There's one little, I call it more of an advanced technique. I don't know how advanced it is for you, but we'll see. Put a 1 in the chat if you set up your next steps at the end of the call, whether it's discovery, whether it's a demo. Okay. So what I want you to start doing moving forward is I want you to set up your next steps in the beginning of the call. Because when you start your call, your prospect is more open to answering your questions. They're more open to being responsive because it's the beginning of the call. We're not talking about commercial yet or pricing or we're not there yet. It's the beginning of the demo or the discovery. Typically, when the call ends, that's when the prospect has another meeting to go to. That's when the prospect knows, oh, the meeting is over, so that's it. I'm turning off my brain. My guard is up. When you set up next steps in the beginning, you're getting a lot more buy-in. So an example of this would be, let's say that you, based on your research before the call and based on how many stakeholders are on the call, you know that the call would either run out of time or require a technical call. So let's just use the run out of time, for example. So we'll do a before and after. Before is you set up the next steps at the end of the call. So imagine you do the demo. The call is sort of you're bleeding over your time. You have to like run and end the call really quick because you have another call to go up to, or the prospect has to go to another meeting. You typically would say something like, "Hey, we ran out of time, but let's get something on the books for next week to chat a little bit more." Maybe prospect will say yes. Maybe they'll say, "We got to talk about this with our team first." That happens a lot. But now let's do an after. What if you now set up the next steps in the beginning of the call? Hey, prospect, sometimes these calls can run out of time, and I want to make sure that we cover everything that you want to go over, including some of the questions you had emailed me. But just in case we don't have enough time, would it be okay if we set up a part 2 of this? I can guarantee you that at least 9 out of 10 people, I would even say 10 out of 10 prospects would say, yeah, sure. Why? It's what's in it for them. I want to make sure that we cover everything that you want to cover, and we may not run out of time. So would it be okay if we did a part 2 so we can go over everything that you wanted to cover? And they would say, yeah, of course. Not 10 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10 times, they will say absolutely. And then you do your demo or you do your discovery. Let's say you are running out of time, or maybe there is some extra time left. You could say, hey, earlier I mentioned we may not have enough time. And I noticed that you had a couple of questions earlier on the call that we weren't able to get to. So why don't we do this? Let's schedule part 2 of this because I know you want to see the rest of it. Would Tuesday at whatever time or Monday at whatever time work for you? So what you're doing is you're bringing up the next steps up front. There's less resistance from the prospect, and they're more likely to say yes to the next steps. Most folks are actually setting up next steps at the end, which makes it a lot more of a resistant.
Hey, Mor, looks like Harish asked a question in the chat. Would it not be premature to set up a next call when they have not heard your pitch book as yet?
Harish, when you say pitch book, you're referring to like the actual demo itself? I assume yes. Yeah. Okay. It wouldn't. It all depends on how you. It depends on what you're setting up the next steps for. So if you're saying like, hey, let's say you're setting up next steps in the beginning of the call and saying like, hey, let's set up next steps for after this call to speak to your CEO or CMO. Well, yeah, that's premature. But you can say something like, if you're running out of, we'll use the example that I gave. If you're running out of time on the call, or you expect the call to run out of times, hey, prospect, we may not have enough time to cover everything on the call that you want to see, but just in case we run out of time, assuming whatever your product is, assuming XYZ is a fit for you based on what you've seen on this demo, would it be okay if we set up a part 2? The language that I'm using, Harish, is assuming based on what you see, it's a fit for you. Would it be okay to set up a next call? Was that helpful? Would that work? Yes, no? Okay. Yeah, okay, perfect. Awesome. Yeah. That language, assuming it's a fit, assuming it would work for you, would it make sense? Because if you don't say those words, hey, assuming this would work for you, assuming this would be a fit, what would the response that you'll get from your prospect will typically be something like, well, I don't know if this is going to work for us. It depends. First, I have to see. So you want to prevent that objection from coming up by proactively calling out that objection. All right. This was, let me go back. Here we are. This is something that I added. You probably saw me post this somewhere on LinkedIn a while ago. It's really tactical. It works really well. But there's another way you can increase your follow-up calls when you're setting up next steps. These are 4 that I do right now. When you're on a call with a prospect, whether again it's a disco, demo, doesn't matter, and they've agreed to your follow-up call, to the next steps on the calendar, you want to send them the calendar invite while you're still on the call. What you don't want to do is you don't want to hang up the call and then send them the calendar invite, because one, if they're very busy and their emails are like any C-level executives or high-level manager, their inbox is constantly getting filled out. They're filled out internally from their own employees or their boss, from spam, from people prospecting them. As soon as while you're on the demo, their inbox is getting filled out. And so when you hang up the call, you don't know if they have another meeting that they have to run to. You don't know if they have to they're about to send out an email to somebody else. There's so many other variables that are happening behind the scenes that you're not aware of that causes deals and invites to get lost because the prospect is so busy. Trust me, you're not the only product that they're evaluating, and you're definitely not the only project that they have on their plate. They have other projects. That's why sometimes prospects will say, we're really interested, love what we're seeing, but they go dark. Sometimes they don't go dark because you're not a fit. It's because they just have a ton of other things on their plate. So that's the first thing. Make sure you're still doing it on the call. Put a 1 in the chat if you're doing it after the call. You're sending the invite after the call. And a 2 if you do it on the call. Okay. Love the honesty. Do it on the call. You'll see. You'll get a lot more results that way. And second thing is, when you're sending them the invite, by the way, while you're still on the call, make sure that they confirm it on the call. This is exactly how I do it, word for word. We'll use Savannah as an example. So imagine Savannah's a prospect. She's agreed to a follow-up call with me for Friday tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. So she says yes. I'll say something like, okay, great. Let me just give me a second. All right, Savannah, I just sent you an invite. Let me know if you got that. I want to make sure we reserve time for you. And I'm telling her to go open up the email, the calendar invite, and I go tell her to confirm it. Otherwise, it gets filled out really fast. And 9 or 10 out of 10 times, your prospect, unless they're running and they have to go, they will confirm it on the calendar, and they're more likely to commit because they're invested now. Now you're making them do a little bit of work, even though There's the whole idea of like, don't make your prospect work. There are times where you need to make them work because they have skin in the game. All right, the third thing that's very important is most demos or follow-up calls or discovery calls, the name of the event is demo with, outreach or demo with Gong. And it's very generic, but that doesn't cut through the noise, especially if your prospect is evaluating 5 other solutions and they have meetings. It gets very lost. But I'll give you an example. Who here has ever gone to an event or a restaurant that had, and you noticed somewhere on the chair or on the table, there was a little card or a paper that said reserved? Put a 1 in the chat. Yeah, and when you saw that, I see it all the time. When I go to a restaurant, it's like table reserved. Every time I see that, I think to myself, "Oh, they must be coming. Someone's coming. It's important, right? The reserved is like, oh, they must be important, and they're coming." There's something that the word reserved has on the psychology of a person, and so what I'd recommend, and I do this, is you put in brackets and in capital letters the word reserved, and then for the first name of your prospect. So reserved for Savannah. And then whatever else you want to typically put, the demo, whatever it is. But the most important part of your event name for a follow-up is that first little thing. Think of it like a subject line of an email. Your email doesn't get opened up if the subject line isn't good enough. So you want to make sure that you're treating the event name like an email subject line. Now, if you want to get a little bit more fancy, which I'd recommend, put an emoji on it. Most prospects don't have emojis on their calendar, but an emoji stands out. It cuts through the noise instantly. So this is something that I do. I put this like warning emoji, reserved for, and then the person's first name, and then my name or whatever else the title of the event is. You can either use the word reserved or you can use the word confirmed. I play around with each one, reserved for or confirmed, either one. And then the fourth thing I recommend as far as setting up next steps and making sure that they show up and limiting that no-show is asking the prospect for a favor. There is a study done. I forgot the name. It was some PhD professor at some college. I have it somewhere, where they did a study where people, they release like that happy chemical, the endorphins or serotonin, whatever it is, endorphins, when they're asked for help. When you ask someone for help, they feel good. So, and there was another, I think Josh Braun actually covered this once. He made a post on his newsletter that a restaurant owner had a problem canceling their reservations. And so he started putting on the reservation like email, "Hey, please let us know if you're unable to make it." That alone ended up fixing the problem of not showing up to your restaurants, to the reservation. So this would work in any scenario. When the prospect has confirmed you're good for 9 p.m. at 10 a.m. with Savannah, I'll say to Savannah, "Hey, Savannah, and by the way, if for whatever reason you're unable to make it or you have to reschedule, can you just please let me know?" 11 out of 10 times they'll tell you, "Yes, I'll let you know." All right. So you're asking for a favor, you just made them commit. You've just done a verbal agreement with them. And because of that, they're more likely to let you know. So these are the 4 things that you should do after you've set up the next steps. Before I move on to the next slide, I want to make sure that what I'm sharing is valuable. So put a V for valuable and an N for no, it's not valuable in the chat, just so I know. You won't hurt my feelings. Cool. I'm looking for a no, but there's no no. Okay, cool. Yeah, feel free to interrupt me with questions. Issues with my Janice? Yes, no? Cool.
I think it's not going in and out, but it does sound a little bit different occasionally. So I think it's just when you move, maybe.
All right, what about now? Now it's good?
Yeah, it's good now.
I'll try not to get so animated. All right. The storm has passed, so there's no, I'm not going to have a outage. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So we covered how to set up next steps where the prospect will want to show up to. And then I had a little bonus where how do you prevent those follow-ups from no showing? But now we're going to talk about the post demo email checklist. You do this. I do this for every post demo. I don't sell software anymore. I sell services and consulting, but my clients sell software. Either way, the framework still works. And I use this to send out after I have a discovery call or multiple discovery calls. And I'm actually going to share with you a real email post discovery email that I sent out to a prospect using this. So every post demo email or post discovery email should have these things, more or less. It should include their challenges and their goals. It should include the words that they've used on the call with you. And I'll get to that. And at a high level, you should cover how you solve their problem. So you're mapping it out. Here are the challenges. You mentioned this. Here's how we do it at a high level. Then you're also going to include next steps. So the next steps that you made with the prospect on that call before you hung up, those next steps and agenda will be on that follow-up email as well. And then what you're going to do is you're also going to reinforce the commitment to the next meeting or whatever the next action item was. So take a screenshot of this before I move on to the next slide. All right. Here's an actual, it's a little blurry, I apologize. Here's an actual email that I sent out to a deal that I recently closed. I closed it as of today. I just got off a kickoff call with them. I changed their name so you don't know their names, but it's not like if you knew what a John was, you would know who John was. But so let's look at the framework. So glad we were able to connect today. Here are the challenges, your challenges and goals. Carrying team's quota by doing your sales yourself. Focus on leadership and pass the baton on to the reps. Pass the baton on to the reps was the language that the prospect used on our call. I went back to our call, I listened to it, and I remember on the call, they're like, I'd like to pass on the baton. I made sure to type those notes up. As a side note, when you're on calls, I know you're using some sort of like call recording software like a Gong, a Voma, whatever, Chorus. Don't rely on just the software to capture the nuances of the call. If you see your prospect's eyebrows raise when you're talking about something, which shows some level of interest, make a note of it. If you see your prospect is wearing some fluffy sweater, make a note of it. These are all things that your software intelligence software, call recording software won't make note of. These are the little things that help you build rapport that make you sound relatable to the prospect. Passing on baton to reps. And he used that language on the call frequently. So I made sure to include that in the email. Second thing I included was increased velocity in ramping up AEs. It currently takes them 8 months to ramp up. Want to be at 3 months. You'll notice that I'm including their challenges and I'm including their goals. Challenge goal. Hit revenue targets that VCs care about. Get 5 to 6 AEs to close 10 to 15K additional MRR. Hit revenue targets that VCs care about is something that, again, they said on the call verbatim. So I just took verbatim and I plugged it in. So now I cover the first layer of the email is challenges and goals. Second layer, remember we talked about at a high level, I'm going to tell them how I'm going to solve it at a high level. Well, first, 50% of the training focuses on preparation, discovery, tonality. The remaining will focus on demoing, objection handling, multi-threading next steps. Third, revamp the sales playbook with modernized sales strategies. That's a high level of what we covered, but I made sure that these items that I'm going to use to solve their problems, we talked about on the call, and now I'm just covering it over here at a high level. And then the last bit, remember I talked about, include the next steps and agenda that you've agreed on at the end of the call in your follow-up email. That's over here. This is what I did. I said, more to send out recap email with next steps. And what I did was, it's included in this email already. Fred and Sally to review gaps in current playbook playing. Third is speak next week to discuss playbook gaps, onboarding, and rates. That is an agenda for the next steps before we hang up the call. I'm including that agenda on the email, on the end of the email. And then remember the last thing I said, reinforce commitment to next meeting. Speak to you on Thursday. I just reinforced it. So take a screenshot of this if you'd like as a resource that you can refer back to. But I followed this framework. I do this every time. Was this helpful? Put a yes in the chat and put a not really if it wasn't. All right, awesome. Yeah, deck will be shared. Yep. Yep. Alrighty. Now, all right. So we covered we covered I'm just gonna check on time. We're good on time. So I covered how to set up next steps for them to show up to. I covered how to set up a follow up email. Now we're gonna talk about how do you top of mind. So many times the follow up emails that I've seen are very much like, "Hey, did you speak to so and so? Hey, would you be interested in setting up another call?" It's always about me. Remember we talked about the acronym WIFT, what's in it for them? Your follow-up emails have to have that same idea. You have to use the same framework for your follow-up emails. Let me just check. Okay, so we'll talk about objections later. So there are 4 things that aligns with the what's in it for them that makes the prospect say, "Oh, great, that was helpful. I may not be ready to make a decision yet, but at least now Savannah is top of mind, or Moore is top of mind, or Gabriel is top of mind." Personal, business, social, and addressing FUD. So personal, I'll give you an example of this. When you're with a prospect on a call and they tell you, "Hey, let's actually reconnect in 2 weeks, not next week because I'm going out of town." What you shouldn't do, you shouldn't say, "Okay, great. What time in 2 weeks would work for you?" What you should do is say, "Oh, where are you going out of town to?" They say, "Oh, I'm going to the Maldives. I'm going on vacation. It's been a while." "Oh, or I'm going to Italy, or I'm going to San Francisco. I've never been there." "Oh, that's awesome. Well, I may send you some stuff that will be fun to do." Now you know on your CRM, you should take notes that they're going on vacation to Italy. And you know that you won't talk to them in 2 weeks. So if you think about it, the follow-up email that they're going to get, the only email that they're going to get, if you guys didn't watch this workshop, would be maybe a recap email. But if you did watch this workshop, you would know that you want to stay top of mind and you should send some email that's personal. And what it is that Google 10 things to do in Italy if you're going there for the first time. Five of the best restaurants in Italy that everyone has to go to. Google these things and then email your prospect maybe a few days before they go on their trip. Be like, "Hey, I remember you said you mentioned you're going to Italy. You have to try out these 5 restaurants. You have to go to these places. It's a must do." That's it. No call to action. Enjoy your trip. That's your only call to action. You're not. The idea is not to get them to buy; it's to get them to remember you, because when they're ready to buy, you're the first one they're going to think of. So that's the personal. Business. All right, business doesn't mean your business, your product. Not Don't send them feature updates, new releases. That's not what I'm referring to. Business is about their business. So I'll give you an example. Personal story. I sell right now sales training, coaching, consulting, advising. Right, and so one of the founders that I spoke with, they don't really have a playbook. It's not really efficient. They're sort of winging it. It's on a Google Doc, whatever it is, and they're trying to scale also. And so I know they're not going to make a decision on the call, and we have a follow up call in like a month. And so I asked myself, like, what do I do from now until 1 month, or what do I do from now until next quarter? Well, I had nothing personal that I can send him, but I did know that he had a pain point around the business. He wanted to scale out his playbook. So what I did was I took a sales playbook framework that I used when I was a VP of sales, and I sent it to him. And I said, "Hey, Jeff," it's a real name. "Hey, Jeff, I remember on the call you mentioned that eventually you'd like to scale out your sales department and you would need some sort of playbook in place. When you are ready to scale, here's a framework that I live and die by." And I sent him. No call to action. None. Maybe hope this was helpful. There is no call to action, because if I did it right, I have a follow-up call on the calendar. Even if, let's say, for whatever reason, the prospect didn't agree to a next step, or you don't have a next steps locked in. People make mistakes. Like sometimes you don't get it on the calendar. Even if not all of your follow-up emails need to have a call to action. I know your sales manager would disagree with that, but I disagree with them. Not all of them that's not how buyers buy. Buyers don't want to be sold to. They want to be helped. If you go to my LinkedIn, you'll see it says, "Help me, don't sell me." If you help them and they're ready to buy, they're going to buy. So make it about their business, not your business. The third thing is social. I don't know about you, but when I was a VP of sales and I had my reps follow up, I told them, if you go on LinkedIn and you connect with a buyer, your prospect, or you engage with a post, I consider that a follow up, not an email or a phone call only. because that's considered a follow-up. What's the point of a follow-up? They're not going to buy on the phone call as a follow-up. They're not going to buy on your follow-up email. That requires you to have another conversation. The point of a follow-up is for you to stay top of mind. Top of mind enough where when it's the right timing and you said something correct, they're like, all right, let's chat. So going on their LinkedIn and commenting on their post, liking their profile, something that causes you to be like, oh, who's that person more that left a meaningful comment? That's top of mind follow-up. So I would put that in the category of a follow-up, and you should do that too. Every one of your follow emails should have this. And you know the best part about this is you're not harassing the prospect. It's not like your typical sales follow-up where you're intruding in their personal inbox. It's not. It's social media. If anything, they'll appreciate it because you've now revamped or leveled up their post. All right. So I did this recently with a CRO. I engaged with her post. I followed up like my email. I sent out like 2 follow-up emails, but the rest of my follow-ups were just me engaging on the post. And then she's like, hey, I appreciate you and commenting. Let's chat. Right. So it works. And the last thing is addressing their FUD. FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Every prospect has it, especially if they are coming from some sort of old way of doing things, if they're coming from Excel spreadsheets, if they come from a legacy software that they've used for 10, 15, 20 years, their FUD is that, well, how do I know it's going to work? How do I know it's going to be easy? Oh, I have to migrate all of the data. Oh, I have to learn a new program. They have all these fears that causes them to not move forward. And you know how it goes in sales, you lose deals to status quo. So, and if you're dealing with a prospect that's coming from a competitor, then their FUD could be, are you more affordable? Do you have the same features, if not better? Do you have better customer service? Every buying scenario has different FUD. And so what you want to do is you want to address that FUD via a follow-up email. This, by the way, is the most, out of the 4, this is the most like, let's talk business type of driven follow-up, but it's still helping the prospect. What's in it for them? Their FUD. So one way I've done this is I've taken a frequently asked question from another customer that was on the fence, that wasn't sure about my product, and I would embed that into a follow-up. Hey, prospect, I know you've been using such and such software for about 15 years, and a lot of concerns that other customers tell me when they've come from a software that's they've been using for so long is, how do I know it's going to work for us in terms of migrating the data? So that's a question I recently received from another customer, and here was my response to them. Hope this was helpful. So it's a follow-up email around my product, my business, but if you think about it, it's really not. It's what's in it for them. I'm helping them. I'm not selling them. I'm helping them make a decision. I'm helping them iron out the due diligence. I'm helping them think about the business. So these are the 4 things that you should do. I'm just checking time. We have about 9 minutes. I can bleed over a little bit, but I don't know about you. So I'm going to go fast. So let's talk about sniffing out objections. Let me just see the previous slide. Okay. I'll go fast. All right. Average salespeople look for good news. What I mean by that is when you're on demos and you're on discovery, you're looking for the prospect to say, oh yeah, that was great. Or you're looking for like those positive signals. Great salespeople look for trouble. They look for problems. They know, great salespeople know that deals that are lost a lot of times happen because internal conversations are happening when you're not in the room, behind closed doors with other stakeholders, and you're like, shit, what do I do now? And so what you want to do is you want to bring up those objections up front. In my university, I have a slide there that talks about the movie 8 Mile. Eminem at the end of the movie, the last rap battle scene, they flip a coin, he goes first. The whole, if you watch that scene, Google on YouTube and watch it afterwards, he ends up talking crap about himself. I do live in a trailer with my mom. I am this, I am that, I am poor. And when it was his opponent's turn to go, his opponent had nothing to say because Eminem called out the objections in advance. So that's exactly what you're going to do here on the next slide. So pay attention. These are some examples of how you can call out objections, how you can look for trouble, look for problems in advance. What about what I just showed you wouldn't work for you, prospect? Or let's say you know that Gabriel's a stakeholder and he's on a call right now, but Savannah I'm talking to Savannah. I'd say, hey, Savannah, what about what I just showed you do you think wouldn't work for Gabriel? given that he's also going to be using this. I'm purposely asking what wouldn't work for them, not what would work. I want to know what are the problems, because decision to not go with your solution is because of what wouldn't work. So that's what I want to know. Another example is, what reservations do you have about what we just spoke about today? Again, I'm not saying what do you like about what we spoke about today? What do you think would work for you? I'm asking what wouldn't work. What's pushing you back? Third one, what do you anticipate your CRO will say no to? Very powerful question. You can use the same thing for a CFO. Again, I'm using CRO, but in your world, maybe it's not the CRO that you're dealing with. Maybe it's the CIO. Maybe it's the CEO. Whatever your main decision maker, stakeholder person that's pushing deals away, that you plug that in here. Who on your team won't love this idea? We know that it takes 6 to 7 buyers now to make a decision, not just one or two. So you know there are other people involved. Who on your team won't love this idea? Who's not rooting for this idea? Who's resisting this change? I know you've been using the software for about 25 years. I can imagine you have some folks on your team that don't want to change. They like how it works. Who on that team is that for you? Trust me, you will get a smirk out of that person, be like, huh, it's actually blah, 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 blah. This is another powerful one. When you take this back to your team, what do you think they'll object to? What concerns do you think they'll have? I do this all. It doesn't matter if you're selling software. You could be selling cars. You could be selling toothbrushes. It works because it's disarming. No salesperson is doing this because they don't want to open up a can of worms. Open up the can of worms. Look for problems. Look for trouble. That's where you prevent deals from going dark. Put a 1 if this was helpful. This part right here. So we have some time left. So I'm gonna. Cool. Yeah. By the way, I laid out 24 quantify pain questions that covers a lot of this stuff. So if you go to my LinkedIn on the featured section, you'll see there. It's free. All right. So do we have any time for? I'll leave. I think we're about done. I mentioned something that I'll cover at the end, a little bonus. So I'll cover that, Savannah, and then we'll open up for questions. But if you follow me on LinkedIn, then you know I talk a lot about this. And you know I have a university. It's a sales coaching program for account executives. So I am your coach. We do it in a group setting, weekly, live every Friday, and we have a Slack community, and we have course content. We have the sales cocktail that I like to call it, with a bunch of resources. And for those that joined us on the webinar, you guys will get 10% off. It's $9.97 a year. It's not a lot. It's not a little, but you have me as a coach essentially, and access to me through Slack. And you get 10% off the year. And I left it open on the back end until June 30th. So you have the whole month to decide if I'm valuable. But yeah, let's open it up for questions.
Lots of good stuff. Feel free to share your questions in the chat. We'll give everybody a few minutes to type their questions out in the chat. And like we had said earlier, the deck and the recording will be shared with everyone after we hop off. Be sure to check out Mor's last session with Aaron to expand more on that first part. Looks like we've got a question here.
Yeah, you want me to read them out? I see it here.
Go for it.
Adi, I don't know how to pronounce the name. I apologize. You can phonetically pronounce it for me. But what if you have limitations on your product? How do you handle related objections? So if it's a lack of feature, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but if it's you don't have a feature that the prospect needs, not wants, but needs, that's not an objection. That's a condition. You have to know the difference. An objection is like, hey, I don't see the value of it, or it's too expensive, or it's too complex. I think it's going to be too complex. That's an objection. You can probably handle that. But if it's I'll give you an example. Like when I used to sell real estate, they taught us that if a seller of a home is selling their home because they're getting divorced and they're very motivated, but they've recently went to a marriage counselor, but now they've rekindled their marriage and they're all good and they're not getting divorced and they're not selling their home, and they tell you, hey, I'm not selling their home, that's not an objection. That's a condition. They're not getting divorced. You're not going to convince them of getting divorced. So if there's a feature that they need that's critical mass, then I would not try to get over that objection. I would mark it in your CRM as a feature loss for whatever reason and follow up with it. The second thing I'd recommend, by the way, a lot of it's a coverage issue, locations around the world. I mean, on a scale of 1 through 10, 10 being mission critical, where does that rank on their priorities? If it's a 10 and you don't have it, you don't have it. There's not that's not a lack of sales issue. That's a condition. Again, a lot of times they may have an objection for a feature that you may not have, but in reality, it's a feature that they think you don't have, but you name the feature differently. You do it differently in your software. So when you do get an objection about a feature that you don't have, what I really suggest you do, it requires a little bit of challenging the prospect, but ask them why they're looking for that feature. And it could be something like this: Hey, Savannah, I know this sounds like a silly question, but what's the reason you need that feature? What are you trying to accomplish? And many times they'll explain to you what they need to accomplish. And oftentimes your software will actually have it, but in a different functionality. And that would work for them. Was that helpful? Hopefully, maybe. All right, let's see. Would you recommend, this is from Rishab, would you also recommend the reserve technique for regular discovery call, not for follow-up calls? Yeah, so the technique that I was referring to, like changing your event name to reserved in capital letter, yeah, for every follow-up call. I do it, like I have a meeting somebody for drinks on Monday evening. I send him an invite. It's like a friend. I met him in a networking event. I put reserved. Yeah, 100%. Have to enter a meeting. Thank you so much. That's not a question. Hold on. What if the client doesn't commit to booking calendars as a next step and just says we will discuss internally and get back to you? So great question. Couple of things. Some of these things my answers are always twofold. They're always preventative and then reactive. Preventative is like what you could have done, and reactive is like what do you do now. So preventative, usually that would happen because a lack of discovery, lack of preparation for the call, or a lack of showing value on the call, or lack of discovery throughout the call. It happens a lot. So I'd recommend going back to your call and find out, were you asking the prospect for feedback throughout the call? Were you looking for problems throughout the call? And you'll be surprised that many times it's not. But let's just say that's a preventative. Reactive, what happens now? You're stuck. You have a call. Prospect says we'll talk about it internally. So we'll discuss it internally is what I call a soft objection. They're not telling you no. They're telling you no without telling you no. Historically, that's what I've noticed. We'll talk about it internally. You're not convinced. So I would call out that objection. I would call it out. The way to do it, hey, Rishab, I feel a little awkward asking you this, but I sense a little, when you say you want to discuss it internally, historically it means like there's something you didn't like about what I showed you. What would that be? So you can call them out on that, or you can say something. If you're not comfortable asking that question, you can say something like, okay, yeah, you want to talk about it internally? That makes sense. Curious, what about what I showed you wouldn't work for you? Or what concerns do you have? Or what reservations do you have? You want to use the look for problems questions. What CRM do you recommend? I find that most CRMs are designed to keep selling on the same customer, and software sales, we sell it, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I personally use HubSpot. But if you're working at a company where there's a there's a leadership in place, they're going to make a decision on the CRM. But I like HubSpot. It's simple. It's easy to use. Yeah, so that's my answer to that. All right. So Lloyd asked, your objection handling technique is great. Wish I had it yesterday. How would you suggest circling back around to someone when you didn't stick the landing at the end of the discovery session? I guess my answer would depend on when are you finding this out? Is this when the call is over, or when the call is over, like you've hung up, or the call is still there, but you're pretty much ending the call? I'm going to assume that it's happening after the call happened. Imagine I had a call with Savannah. I'm like, oh crap, I totally missed it. I will call myself out on it. I'll either call up the prospect, like, hey, Savannah, started calling on the fly. Do you have a brief, 2 minutes? And then I'll just go for it right there. And I was listening back to our call, and you had asked me a question, and I wanted to kick myself in the foot because I realized that may have been something that you were concerned about, and it was blah, 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 whatever it was. If you're sending an email, I would email the prospect and say, hey, Savannah, I was listening back to our call. You mentioned something that I have a feeling that is a concern for you. And then whatever that feeling is, just share it on the email and ask a question. Is that something that's a problem? So I would just own it, just follow up on it. That's not a big deal. Ideally, you do it on the call because they're on the call. They're not hiding behind the screen. It's a lot easier. Trying to go through the questions. Any question I didn't ask or I didn't answer or I didn't. Let's see. Gabriel, curious to understand if there were any times when you were anticipating objection when the call just turned into a very negative feedback session about your product, and how did you handle that? How did you handle that? I feel like AEs usually won't dig too much into future objections. Are there any times you were anticipating objection? Yeah, I mean, so an example of this, a very common one, is if you know that your prospect is evaluating a competitor and you know that competitor is much cheaper than you and you are 3 times more. And you know historically that typically is why prospects pull back a little bit. If you know that's happening, I wouldn't save price for last. I would talk about price first. Hey, Savannah, I know you're coming from so-and-so software. I have a lot of customers that used to use it, and now they use us. But at first, they were really hesitant because if you look at our pricing, we're 3 times more than so-and-so software. So I just wanted to sort of call out that elephant in the room. My only thing is, if the number one priority for you is getting the cheapest software, they are going to win 10 out of 10 times. But if what you're looking for is if what you need, the number one thing for you is to solve XYZ problem, customers have told us that we've won 10 out of 10 times. So that's how I would handle that.
All right. I know we have a few more questions in the chat. Feel free to reach out to Mor on LinkedIn with that question. If you didn't get yours answered, and we'll hopefully have him again for another session. I know he packs the hour full of goodness. So love having him and thankful for the time that he contributed today. So everybody, have a great rest of your day, and we will get the deck and the recording to you as soon as I hit, or not as soon as I hit, but when we get it processed and everything, we'll send it over to you within a couple hours. So look for that in your inbox. And we've got a couple good events coming up for AEs specifically, so be sure to check those out on our site. And we will see y'all next time.
Yeah, and I have to say, I love 2 things: the honesty of the audience today, and then the questions. Fantastic.
Yes. Awesome. All right, everybody. We'll see y'all on the flip side.